Cypress Village Retirement Community offers carefree lakefront living with a variety of residential options, a wealth of services and amenities, a full calendar of fun and engaging activities. As a life care community, Cypress makes aging in place simple.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, why do we assume the worst about people with opposing political views but fail to recognize the fault in ourselves? We talked to the author of Undue Hate about why we should embrace intellectual humility. Then, between financial pressures, school closures, and a tumultuous election season, we get an update on the state of First Coast schools facing an uncertain future. And take a seat on the front stoop of Springfield. It's time for the community's annual musical Porchfest. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also...
I'm Corva Coleman. The White House says President Biden will make remarks later this morning about this week's presidential election. Biden and Vice President Harris have called to congratulate President-elect Donald Trump on his victory. Republicans will control the Senate in the next session with at least 52 seats. There are some seats that are still too close to call in Arizona, Maine, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. It's not yet clear which party will control the House of Representatives. NPR's Barbara Sprunt reports if the GOP retains its majority in that chamber, Donald Trump will have a unified government.
Most competitive House races remain too close to call, with many outstanding in blue states on the West Coast. GOP lawmakers are confident they'll hold a narrow majority in the House. If they do, they'll cement unified government. Republicans would control both chambers of Congress and the White House, giving them the power and numbers needed to enact a Republican legislative agenda. One of the most consequential tasks facing the new Congress next year will be the remaking of the tax code. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, one of President-elect Trump's signature pieces of legislation in his last term, expires next year. Barbara Sprunt, NPR News, Washington.
President-elect Trump has said that he will allow former presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., quote, go wild on health. Kennedy supported Trump in the election. For years, Kennedy has spoken out against vaccines, but he has said the incoming Trump administration won't take vaccines away from people. NPR's Ping Huang has more.
What he's doing here is, on the one hand, saying that we just want more information. On the other hand, he's challenging the safety of vaccines, which has long been established relative to the risks that they protect against. Kennedy is a known vaccine skeptic. He's called COVID vaccines a crime against humanity, pushed claims that vaccines cause autism over and over. That is not true. It is disproven.
NPR's Ping Huang reporting. The leaders of Japan and South Korea have called President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Seoul that is even as both countries prepare for possible U.S. tariffs on their economies.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol spoke by phone with Trump for 12 minutes, discussing economic and security matters, including North Korea sending troops to Russia. The two agreed to meet in person at an early date. Trump also agreed to an early meeting with Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in their roughly 5-minute phone call. Trump has long criticized Japan and South Korea's export surpluses with the United States and has tried to use tariffs to swing the balance of payments in the U.S.'s favor. During Trump's first term, his Japanese counterpart, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, used a mix of personal flattery of Trump and hard-nosed negotiating to avoid a trade war. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
On Wall Street in pre-market trading, Dow futures are higher. This is NPR.
And you're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The St. Johns County Commission Tuesday axed a proposal for more than 3,000 homes in what a Boston-based developer was calling an agri-hood. The neighborhood, proposed west of St. Augustine, would have incorporated a community farm and other agricultural elements among its thousands of single-family homes, but the St. Johns County Commission wasn't buying. And neither, it seems, was the public. One St. Johns County resident telling the commission during a lengthy public comment period that the area couldn't handle more growth, much less the extra stress on the school system that 3,000 more homes would add.
The optics don't look very good. We're here on National Election Day, taking time out of our days, our work lives, to say what's going to directly impact us as citizens. And I expect you to respond to the will of the people.
County commissioners cited traffic impacts and a lack of clarity on certain elements of the project in the denial. What's billed as the world's largest female surf event hits the waves in Jacksonville Beach this weekend. Surfers competing in the U.S. Air Force Supergirl Surf Pro will be paddling out first thing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mornings. A baker's dozen of free concerts are also on the schedule at the Jacks Beach Seawalk Pavilion. Among them, the Supergirl DJ contest Saturday afternoon and Joan Jett and the Blackhearts that night at 8:30. Go to supergirljacks.com for more information. We have the chance for some rain this afternoon. Early in the afternoon, highs will be in the mid-80s.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Insperity, providing HR services and technology, from payroll, benefits, and HR compliance to talent development. Learn more at Insperity.com/HR Matters. And the Doris Duke Foundation.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, why we tend to assume the worst about people with opposing political views and how recognizing that could help heal a polarized society. Then, voters approve a tax hike for education in St. Johns County while Duval grapples with school closures and $1 billion deficit. We get an update on the state of First Coast schools from two reporters on the beat. But first, is it possible to cut your hate in half? Author Dan Stone makes the case for bridging our political divides and enhancing public discourse. He'll be in town next Saturday, November 16th, as part of the TEDx Jacksonville 2024 conference, and he joins me now by phone. Dan Stone, good morning.
Good morning.
So it seems like a timely conversation to be talking about this election week, but when did you start considering this topic?
I have been thinking about this topic for quite a while, actually. I have been doing research on polarization and emotional polarization for really for over 10 years now. So polarization has been building up for decades now. It's not just a Trump era phenomenon.
Yeah.
So I've been working on it and thinking about it for a while. Yeah.
So you are chair of the economics department at Bowdoin College. You're a behavioral economist, which quite frankly is something I didn't even know existed until a couple of months ago when I heard somebody on the radio who was one. But explain what it means to be a behavioral economist.
Sure. Yeah. So behavioral economics is the area of economics that incorporates psychology and tries to make economic theory and models sort of more psychologically realistic. So that's what it is in a nutshell. Economics traditionally did not incorporate a lot of psychology, even though, of course, a lot of economic decision-making does involve psychology. Behavioral econ sort of brings those fields together.
And so, I mean, my understanding is that, we expect people to behave rationally when it comes to economic decisions, but that when you put our behavior through a behavioral lens, very often our decisions around economic issues really aren't very rational, sometimes very rash or impulsive.
Yeah, so I think people have very different opinions on the extent to which they would agree with your statement that people are expected to behave rationally, but I think even behavioral economists recognize that most people make pretty reasonable decisions most of the time and trying to identify, and we're far from perfect, of course, and so we also make mistakes all the time, but a lot of the mistakes are sort of idiosyncratic and random and they sort of cancel out in some ways. We get lucky with some decisions and unlucky with others. And the hard thing to do is to figure out sort of systematic patterns and decisions which are not so rational, which actually maybe make ourselves worse off in the long run. and we found a number of patterns that doesn't, these things do, of course, indeed happen, but documenting them is not so easy.
So, part of what you look at are things like cognitive bias, and you have found an overlap, obviously, in the world of our political views and our political interactions. So, explain a little bit about how you got into that particular area of study and what generally you have found.
Sure, sure. Right. So even behavioral economists don't typically study politics, though a lot of them do nowadays. So I started off in this area actually studying media. So media, a lot of media, of course, is produced by private for-profit firms. So it's more of a natural topic for economists to study. And going back a decade or two, economists began to recognize that a lot of media content, of course, is influenced by psychological forces, right? The media content, which is potentially profit maximizing, is the content that appeals to people for psychological reasons. So there are natural connections to psychology and behavioral economics there.
Just a quick question: Are you
so
talking? Are you talking about news media in particular?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, news media. So cable news, all types of news media, newspapers, cable news, and then the internet media is its own world, of course. So there's about a couple decades ago, the question of media bias sort of started to get a lot of attention. And one of the questions economists looked at is, in what sense can we actually scientifically measure whether different types of media outlets are biased, and then why would they be biased? Why would private, potentially profit maximizing firms find it profitable to offer bias? That sounds like an unprofitable thing to do. And so I started working on that, and then that's naturally connected to the broader question of polarization more broadly. So media firms having incentives to offer information which is potentially skewed in one direction or the other is closely related to this broader issue of people having polarized beliefs about political issues.
I mean, when you say closely related, I mean, I'm guessing that you found that there is economic motivation for these companies to provide some sort of bias in the coverage that they provide. But when you're talking about the connection then to polarization in society, are you saying that that is there for causing that kind of political polarization?
So the cause and effect goes both directions. So polarization, like I said, it goes back decades. And as news consumers generally become more polarized, as our ideologies and beliefs spread apart, that is going to create demand for different types of news and cause more ideologically differentiated news, so to speak, or more polarized news to become more appealing to the news firms. And then, of course, as you provide people with information which confirms their existing beliefs and tells them they're right, they're going to be even more confident in those beliefs and be even less interested in news from different viewpoints. So there's a feedback process where both things grow.
Mm-hmm.
And then around even just 10 years ago, it wasn't just me, especially in political science, people started to realize that we're not just polarized in terms of our beliefs about policy issues, things like climate change and taxes and immigration and stuff, but we're really emotionally polarized in the sense that we have grown to increasingly dislike people we disagree with politically and feel more coldly toward those we disagree with. And again, there's sort of cause and effect in both directions there, where the more we disagree on issues with people, the more we're going to dislike them. But also, the more we dislike the other side, the less likely we are to trust them, the less likely we are to want to listen to their opinions on the issues, to want to compromise with them. So this emotional aspect was something that I and a bunch of others, not so many in economics. 10 years ago, there are more and more people in economics recognizing the importance of what we call affective polarization, which is emotional polarization.
Yeah, I want to
Even in
talk a little bit.
economics,
I want to talk more
yeah.
about that in a minute. But you coined this term undue hate. Explain to me, what is that? This is like a tendency to assume the worst.
Yeah. So that is a term that I use to refer to extreme hostility, dislike, maybe even hate, that is essentially unjustified. It's based on false beliefs. That's based on beliefs about who it is that you're hating that are not that are either factually incorrect or they're not justified based on the information you have available to you. So I'm not going so. I mean, as an economist, I'm a little reluctant to make claims on whether what should be hated in general and what should be loved. I'm a little agnostic about that. I'm not going so far as to say we should never hate anything, but I am going so far as to say that if you hate X or person, if you hate Joe because you think Joe hates puppies and Joe actually loves puppies, then you feel undue hate towards Joe. Your hate is not justified based on who Joe really is.
I mean, can you think of a political example that would apply in this case?
Yeah. So there are tons of examples in America today where Democrats and Republicans have beliefs about the other side which are essentially too pessimistic. So a big one is that even though we truly have become more emotionally polarized, both sides feel more coldly toward the other than they did decades ago. Both sides actually overestimate how much they are disliked by the other party. So scale 0 to 100, say Democrats give Republicans a 20. That's pretty low, right? A warm feeling scale. This is where a higher number would mean that you feel more warmly toward the other side. A lower number is more cold. So say we give our own party an 80 and we give the other party a 20. That's pretty bad. Well, we actually think that the other side would only give us a 10. We actually are too pessimistic about how they feel toward us. So even though they do feel pretty cold, they don't feel as hostile as we think they do. And if they and we think that they hate us, that makes us hate them, right? We don't like to be hated. So the perception that we're hated feeds into our own hostility toward them, and so overestimating their hatred does it.
Yeah, interesting.
There's a bunch of other evidence. Yeah.
I just want to take a break here and say, if you're just joining us, we are talking to Dan Stone about trying to mitigate hate in the political sphere. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can email comments or questions to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org, or you can tag us on social media. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead. What were you going to say there?
Oh, no problem at all. So I was going to say there are other examples I could talk about, but I don't want to go on and on unless you'd like me to.
Well, let's talk about, we're talking about subjective feelings, right? As a behavioral economist, how are you able to demonstrate that they're objectively wrong, if you're talking about a subjective sense?
Right. So I don't want to make any claims about what people should or shouldn't like, but what we can do is assess the accuracy of beliefs about observable features of the other side. So if, like I was just saying, if I don't want to be hated, and I think, suppose I'm a Democrat and you're Republican, and I think you hate me, and then we ask you, how do you feel about me? And you actually say, I wouldn't say I hate, I strongly dislike. If hearing that makes me say, okay, well, I don't mind you too much either. If having my beliefs about you be corrected makes me feel more warmly towards you, that shows that my initially strong feelings of dislike or whatever were based on a misperception. And so even by my own standards of whatever it is I decide to like or dislike you on, by those standards, I was disliking you too much. I was disliking you based on a false perception of who you are. So if we can show that when we correct people's misperceptions, that causes them to warm up to the other side, that means that their initial coldness was based on a misperception, even given their own subjective criteria for deciding how to feel cold or warm toward others.
So I know that we're talking about this in the context of political polarization. It's something that you began looking at through the lens of news media and how they were presenting information and whether they benefited by inserting bias. But have you been able to objectively ascertain whether there are actually these large differences between groups of people that politically disagree, or whether those are perhaps smaller differences than we perceive and are just amplified to make us think that we are farther apart than we are?
Yeah, so there certainly are big differences, but there are also big misunderstandings. So that's perhaps my optimistic take is to focus on the misunderstandings and the ways that we are not as far apart as we think that we are, and there are plenty of examples of that. So I think, given that we're all looking for ways to make progress, and not just in terms of getting along for the sake of getting along, but in terms of governing the country more effectively and actually just general productivity, we need to figure out how to overcome these misperceptions. So there are plenty of misperceptions, but there are plenty of real divides too. I'm not denying that.
We've got a question from Robert in St. Augustine, I think, with like a question about a practical application. Robert, go ahead. Are you there, Robert? I'm going to put you on hold, Robert. So when it comes to like strategies or tactics, are there exercises people can do to, I don't know, change the way that they're perceiving how much they're hated by other people, or perhaps mitigate how much animosity they feel towards people on the other side of the political spectrum? Like actual kind of advice or suggestions of
Sure.
behavior modification.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about that sort of thing next week. So I don't want to, give too much away. I'm really excited to talk about it at the TEDx conference, which is it's going to be awesome. The organizers have done a great job, and the other speakers look amazing. But in a nutshell, I'm going to focus on the idea that we should question our beliefs more than we're intuitively inclined to, that we should remember that we generally don't know as much as we think we do. We should accept uncertainty and just remember that when we think we know something, we might not. And I'm going to use other words to talk about this basic idea, and it turns out to, it almost sounds like common sense, the idea that we don't know as much as we think that we do. But there are a lot of subtleties to it, and there's a lot of complexity. But ultimately, the main recommendation is to embrace uncertainty while also recognizing that there are times where we can justifiably become confident in our beliefs when our confidence is based on valid evidence. So, not saying never be totally nihilistic and just say I don't know about everything, but in general, when we learn a fact which seems to imply that someone we disagree with is horrible, remember that there's probably much more to the story than we think there is. There's just so many examples and so many studies supporting this as a broad general phenomenon.
I want to take a call from John in Riverside. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Good morning. What I wanted to say about this was, traditionally you didn't discuss religion or politics. It wasn't going to go anywhere. You're just going to cause problems. And so, but today social media puts our religious and our political feelings out in front. That's how we're interacting with everybody. I'm a member of a club that does not allow discussion of politics because it'll only break it up. So I have a friend from there that I've known for 18 months. We've talked about other things. We went on a retreat last week, and during that time, he kept bringing up his political beliefs. Now, I already like this individual, and I admire certain things about him. He was there with his wife who had some health problems. He was very doting. I admired the marriage they had. But today, so I learned his politics after I had an impression of him. We don't get this chance anymore because the algorithms on social media can get more clicks if they put us together with people we know and put what we disagree about out front. The other thing is the anonymity. The things you can say on social media are things that people would never say or they used to not say face to face. But I don't think we can underestimate that there are forces trying to make us fight for the sake of clicks.
Thank you, John. Dan, your thoughts about that?
I think those are great points. Absolutely. it's much easier to talk about politics after we've gotten to know whoever it is we're talking to, and we've earned their trust, and we've grown to trust them. Then if they say something we disagree with politically, we think, okay, well, who knows? Maybe there's more to this than I had thought before, or, okay, I disagree with them, but I know they're not a bad guy overall. And yes, we're at our worst on social media for other reasons, and so social media is part of the story. It's not what I'm going to talk about next Saturday. Is social media has gotten a ton of attention, of course, on social media and in the news, and I'm actually going to talk about connections between political polarization and polarization and other types of relationships, like even husbands and wives and neighbors and brothers. And I'm going to talk about general psychological forces that can cause people to become too emotionally polarized. But I completely agree with the caller's points. Social media is part of the story. It's not the whole story at all. This polarization trend started before social media. It goes back to about 1980, and it's been trending up at a steady pace since then in the U.S.
Interesting.
So it's not just social media. Yeah.
I want to take a call from Brittany in Putnam County. Good morning, Brittany. Go ahead.
Good morning. My biggest question, I guess, or my concern is that do you see this polarization going away in the future? I have a lot of friends and a lot of people in my kind of community or area that have shared and have expressed thoughts that align with, the conservative party and some of Trump's rallies and things that are just the most horrible and horrific things you could say about people. But when I see the kind of rhetoric that I would put out, okay, hey, you're conservative, I think you're an idiot for voting, or I think you're this, but the other side is, that we're demonic and we should be slaughtered or destroyed. I mean, is that kind of polarization going to go away, or is it going to trend and make it worse? I mean, I've talked to people who I've been friends with for years, and that's the kind of rhetoric they share about liberals, Democrats, people on the left, and I just don't see that from the other side. Do you think it's an even keel here? I don't, I would never wish anything that horrible on somebody, but now it seems to be in our faces every day, and it was for years, and we've been, dealing with that, people on the left and Democrats for years. So I just want to get your thoughts on something that, if it really is that severe, or, but yes, thank you. I appreciate you taking my call.
Thanks, Brittany. Dan, I mean, what if people don't see parity, as Brittany mentions, from one side to the other in terms of the level of rhetoric?
Yeah, so I think there are some real differences between the parties and supporters of both parties. In terms of the data, there are a lot of similarities in terms of general feelings of hostility and general misperceptions. I would say for the rhetoric, which seems the very worst, we need to be careful to not there will be examples of this, and it's natural to, when we hear about examples of this, to think that those examples are more representative of the other side than they really are. So, watch the news, and you're going to hear about, the very worst, the very most extreme things happening in the world. You're not going to hear about more general representation. So, just be careful not to extrapolate too much from the most extreme things. The caller, also asked about sort of what's going to happen in the future. Is this going to get worse or better? And this is, such a hard thing to predict. And so one of my recommendations would be to be very wary of anyone who does claim to be able to predict it. We've been in a pretty steady pattern of just sort of generally increasing polarization over the last few decades. So one thought would be that it would take some sort of major paradigm-changing event for us to change course. And in the absence of that, things are not going to change fundamentally. But there are scholars and people working in this area who think that maybe we've peaked and that things are going to turn around. And I'll just throw out the name of one guy who's doing interesting work who claims that. His name is Matt Burgess, Burgess. Not saying I endorse everything that he's written and said, but he makes a really interesting case that polarization is turning around, or so it's worth checking out.
All right. We got an email from Judy, and she's saying regarding contrasting political parties, it's more than just thinking we know something when a powerful party develops and passes laws that affect the everyday lives of targeted persons. So, I guess she's saying there's more than just maybe a perception of a disagreement if you feel
Right.
that you're in a group where laws are being passed that are going to personally affect you.
Right. So sometimes our perceptions are indeed completely accurate. So I'm not claiming that all of the negativity is based on misperception, but there's evidence that a lot of it is. And there's also it's very possible to misinterpret one fact as meaning more than it does to assume that, say, a particular law that we're strongly opposed to or that hurts us personally is supported by more of the other side than it is, or that their reasons for supporting the law are worse, they're more malicious than they really are, something like that. So even when we have a very clear understanding of one particular issue or fact or law, it's possible we don't understand the bigger picture as well as we do. In fact, I would say it's likely that we don't understand the bigger picture as well as we intuitively think.
So just briefly, before we wrap, you talk about something that you refer to as intellectual humility. Explain what that is and how that could factor into reducing political polarization.
Right. So that's related to what I was saying earlier about accepting uncertainty and also reminding ourselves that things are more complicated than we think most of the time. It's being humble about our beliefs. It means instead of saying I know this is going to happen, saying I think this is going to happen. It means being open to hearing other people's points of view, not just to be polite, but because we think we might actually learn something. It means not being afraid to change our beliefs because we think that it will make us look like we were wrong before or look like we're too easily persuaded. But we should, but recognizing that everyone is always in a state of learning or should be in a state of learning. So we should all be adjusting our beliefs well. Again, being careful not to adjust too much. So we have to find that sweet spot where we're not stuck in the mud, but also not reacting to every new piece of info we stumble across.
Right. Well, he's the author of Undue Hate, a behavioral economic analysis of hostile polarization in U.S. politics and beyond. And he's speaking at the TEDx Jax 2024 conference on Saturday, November 16th at UNF. Dan Stone, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Up next, the challenges and uncertainties facing First Coast schools amid a turbulent election season, financial strains, and looming school closures. Welcome back. Well, on Tuesday, voters in St. Johns County approved 2 taxes for education. At the same time, Duval is juggling school closures and a multi-million-dollar, even billion-dollar deficit. Here to discuss the state of First Coast schools are 2 reporters who've been following both situations closely. Megan Maillicoat, education reporter for Jacksonville Today. Hey, Megan.
Good morning, man.
Also, Noah Hertz, Jacksonville Today reporter focusing on St. Johns County. Hi, Noah.
Hi, good morning.
So what was the big news out of Tuesday's election in St. Johns County, Noah?
So I would be remiss to not point out that there's a new member on the school board, and that was something big. But I will say that, the big exciting result out of the election on Tuesday night was that voters approved in St. Johns County to extend the half-cent sales tax that funds school improvements and capital improvements and whatnot for another 10 years, as well as they approved a completely new 1 mil property tax that is going to specifically fund teacher salaries, teacher retention, and those kinds of efforts within St. John's.
St. John's had enormous voter turnout, well over 80%, which was, among the highest in the state. St. Johns County is a very red county and typically pretty anti-tax.
Yeah, I think I had a conversation with the superintendent the night about an hour after polls closed when it looked, all the precincts weren't even in and it was still decisive enough that it had definitely passed. And he was elated. It was really interesting talking to him because I even said that. I said, I don't think it's unfair to say this is a very red county, and it's a county where I would say that most people in ordinary circumstances would be pretty much disposed to say no to any new tax that the government is proposing. And you had to get at least some of those people on board if they were going to get as big of a margin as they did with this one. And the thing he said to me was that, he thought that they made their appeal strong enough that the quality of life in St. Johns County that people enjoy is in part because of the schools. And if they can't fund the schools, if there aren't enough teachers, if they aren't able to build more schools, then what's going to happen to that quality of life? And that was really the argument that the school board was making going into the election.
I also looked back at a story that you did in August on the same subject. And, they decided to put this on the November ballot instead of the primary ballot. And I wonder if that was strategic in terms of expecting that the turnout for the primary, because it's such a red county, would be weighted towards people who might be even more anti-tax.
Yeah, no doubt. I think because in St. John's in the primary, the turnout was around 30%, as 30% of the county's registered voters, whereas, yeah, you said in the general we got 86% thereabouts of registered voters in St. John's, which is really incredible. And really, really incredible that people really, as he said, stepped up for the schools in this way. So, yeah.
Megan, how did the elections shake out for Duval County? What were some of the things happening on Tuesday and then just kind of surrounding Tuesday? Because there's so much happening.
It's been a big week for Duval schools. There was one school board election left on Tuesday because it had been in the primary with 3 candidates and then came to the general for a runoff. And so Reggie Blunt won his election against Hank Rogers. But it came at the same time as the school board's decision to close schools on Monday night, in a meeting that was very late, lasted until about midnight. They had 6 schools up for a potential closure, and the school board decided to close 3 of them and then postpone the closure of the remaining 3 until the next school year because there was some community concerns that needed to be worked out, and the school board didn't want to rush into the closure.
And so this is a little bit of an opposite situation as we're seeing in St. Johns County.
Mhm.
NOAA's reported that they're going to be using this tax to hire hundreds of teachers and fill vacancies. Duval is seeing this attrition that really is kind of hollowing out some of its core city or urban schools.
Yeah, the 2 districts could not be more different in that regard. That St. John's problem is that there's way too many students and the schools are way overcrowded. Whereas Duval is saying, there's under enrolled schools to the degree where they're having to close some. And St. John's has seen kind of a bit of an attrition of teachers towards Duval because Duval has done things in the past to attract teachers. And St. John's is just so crowded and it comes in with its own issues that it's kind of sent some of the teachers over there.
Mhm.
So the 2 issues that we're talking about today are certainly related in the 2 counties, but they come from very different perspectives.
And so the school district has been pretty hard-nosed about looking at these school closures. They are looking at a massive deficit. They have real concerns about what that could mean for their own autonomy. But they also did respond to a very emotional appeal from students. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they had originally proposed also to close the Young Men's, Young Women's Leadership Academy magnet program at Eugene Butler Middle School. And in a public hearing about a week before the vote on Monday, parents, community members, and even a bunch of students came out to just basically plead with the board to not close their program. So the board ended up actually removing that item from the agenda even before the vote. And then they said it's not going to come back anytime soon, and they are like recruiting a sixth grade class for the coming school year, which seems to indicate that they plan to keep the program going.
Like, what was so persuasive about their presentation? Because obviously there have been a lot of appeals from people representing community schools, parents who have kids in those schools saying these are essential elements of our community. You know, if you close them, it's really going to fundamentally change not only how our kids are educated, but also resources for family members and just a sense of community.
hmm So I think one of the most persuasive things was honestly the perspective of the students. Just from watching the things that came out, plus to see the way that these community members advocated for their school was very persuasive. And really, if you think back several months, several schools advocated effectively because there were other schools on the proposed closure list too over the summer. You had your Fishweir and your Holiday Hill and your John Stockton and Atlantic Beach and a whole bunch of other schools that formed these advocacy groups that effectively, made their case and came off the proposed closure list. The difference here was, in part, that there wasn't as much time to make the case because the list wasn't finalized for the closures until I think it was October 1st. It was the very beginning of October anyway. And so then set off this like flurry of impact meetings with the schools that were going to be affected, and there just wasn't nearly as much time for these community schools to make their case. But in the case of this magnet program, they took the time that they had and used it well.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we are talking about schools and updates and elections in St. John's and Duval County. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I'd like to take a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. I don't know if you guys have any answers to this, but I remember when Superintendent Greenwood and I thought we had two tax referendums. One was for, funding for structures, and the other was for teachers' salary increase. I just got my property tax bill, and 40% of it is due to schools. There are 4 different entries: discretionary, capital outlay, voter approved, and schools local. And I have no understanding if we approve for teachers' salaries and teachers' attrition, where is that money going? Is that a slush fund now? And for capital outlay, if they're closing these schools, which are these older schools we're going to repair, is that money going to then float down to charter schools that are newer and privately owned? Where would I get these answers if you guys don't have it? I just don't understand this.
Well, Linda, I think let's take them one by one. I mean, I think the answer is yes to a lot of those, right?
A lot of those.
We did pass these taxes.
Right.
And they are going to certain specified needs, but times have changed, I guess, since those promises were made.
Yes. And so I think that's important to remember here is that a couple of notable things happened in the interim since that legislation was passed with Dr. Green. Is one thing that happened was the sales tax that the district initially expected to get a much higher percentage of, the state passed a law that said they have to share it with charter schools at a higher percentage. And so what the state had budgeted in their, projections to receive from this tax is now cut by some dramatic percentage that means that they're not going to be able to accomplish with it what they had intended to accomplish. And then with the school closures, they are expecting to save, for the 3 that they're going to close this coming school year, that was Chairman Darrell Willey at the school board meeting on Monday asked for specific figures, like how much will it save to close schools A, B, and C. In total, for the 3 that were chosen, it's about $3.3 million for the coming school year. And so, whereas the district has said, these closures are going to be a great way to save the money. The schools are already under enrolled. This is a way we can save money without impacting personnel. Well, there's still $97 million left because the budget shortfall is projected to be about $100 million.
So it's like $3.3 million out of $100 million.
Yeah. So another thing to remember is that there's been some COVID era funding that the district has been receiving for 4 different fiscal years now, and that expired at the end of September. And so I think it was 330 some odd million, I believe, that the district has received since 2020. And so as construction costs have risen, and as everybody can remember over the last several years how groceries cost more, everything costs more. So the school district is not immune from that. And so as the school district's costs have increased, some of it has we haven't noticed the impact of it yet because the COVID funding has helped to bridge that gap.
Mm.
And then also the district has been tapping into its savings account, basically. But it doesn't have, that account is
Way down.
bottomed out, and the COVID era funding stopped. And so if you'll remember, too, last summer, Superintendent Dana Krisner at the time had said that 700 jobs might be on the line in order to make up that deficit. And the outcry from the community caused the district to look for ways to not make that happen. And so they kind of scrapped that plan for this school year, but the deficit is still there.
It
So,
exists.
yeah, it exists.
Yeah. I think people are surprised, Noah, by how much money school districts actually do claim. You guys have done some reporting about, concerns in St. Johns County about the fact that the school district budget dwarfs the county's budget. Basically, the county's budget is like 1.2 billion, and the district's is 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, and people, I think, are just surprised by that fact. It's not uncommon. I think the same is true in Duval, where the school district's budget is over 3 billion and the city's budget is about 2.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is something that I said to the superintendent one of the times that we talked, is I said, like, look, one of the things I'm seeing is, like, people are so confused as to how an entire county's government can be dwarfed by the school districts. And the thing he said to me was, like, look, it's apples and oranges. It's too hard to compare because schools have so many operating costs. County governments have to run a lot of things, but one thing that they don't have to run as much of are big buildings on big plots of land that have hundreds of employees in those buildings, And so, and on top of that, you've then got all the kids coming inside the buildings. But I mean, listening to you talk about all the issues in Duval, it's just fascinating because, like you said, St. John's could not be any more different. I mean,
Could not be more different.
they can't build schools fast enough in St. Johns County because, the big complaint in St. Johns County when you talk to parents is, I don't want my kid to be in a portable. Like, this is ridiculous. Why is my kid in a portable? Why does my kid have to go to this bus stop because there aren't enough bus drivers? Like, it is incredible listening to what they are going through, especially since, one of the elements of what was passed on Tuesday was the extension of the half-cent sales tax that was initially passed in 2016. And, the school board has touted the success of the half-cent sales tax. They were able to use it to partially or completely build 4 schools, expand a bunch of others, improve their intercom system, school security, all this stuff. And so the pitch they were making to voters there was like, look, we know we need new schools, but if you don't approve this, we are not sure how we're going to fund those new schools. And like you said, when you see a budget that high, there was some concern from voters, like, where the heck's all the money going then? But yeah.
I just want to take a quick call from Tom on the west side. Tom, just very briefly, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that there needs to be some sort of plan to deal with the schools buildings that they're closing, because where I live, there's one very nearby that's just sitting vacant, and my concern is it's going to be a target for vandalism and crime.
Yeah, thanks. And that is a reality, Megan.
It is, and the district has projected when they're going to demolish a lot of these buildings, but it'll be a few years, and it costs, I think, about $500,000 on average to demolish a school building so that it doesn't become just an empty building in poor shape in the neighborhood. But then there's been some concern too that I've heard of charter schools coming in and wanting those buildings, which is a large can of worms to get into about how that would then impact the district's enrollment in those neighborhoods.
Yeah. I also just want to, before we wrap, talk about the makeup of the Duval County School Board versus the St. Johns County School Board. This is a true conservative majority, Megan, and they've really been influenced by some outside groups like that have been supported by the governor. Moms for Liberty is a supporter of at least 3, right?
I think 5 now. 5. Mm-hmm.
5 of 7.
5 of 7. And so, yes, absolutely. And, Moms for Liberty came in, I believe it was first noted in the 2022 election, and tried to get their candidates into school boards across the state of Florida. And Ron DeSantis then this election cycle made it one of his primary goals to get candidates that are friendly to his goals into school boards across the state as well. And we saw that in Duval with the local GOP. They were very strategic about it. And
that's real unusual for a large urban school district nationally to be so conservative. But Noah, conservative St. Johns County really hasn't seen a similar activism on that level.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some examples of that in past elections. I know the challenger that one of the members of the school board had in a recent election had that, but this year it's a very conservative school board, but it's a very conservative school board that has so much other things that they have to focus on that culture war, all of these things that we're seeing at the national and the state level are just really not as prominent these days on the St. Johns County School Board.
Well, Jacksonville Today's Megan Maillicoat, Noah Hertz, thank you so much for being on today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Up next, a one-of-a-kind music festival turns the porches of historic Springfield into a neighborhood performance space.
Volunteers in Medicine has been providing health care for the working uninsured for over 20 years. With over 200 dedicated medical volunteers, Volunteers in Medicine operates clinics in West Jacks and South San Marco. We're committed to a healthier community. More at vimjax.org. Congaree and Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpen.com.
I'm Deepa Fernandez.
I'm Robin Young. It's been one of the most unusual presidential campaigns in U.S. history.
As the votes are being counted, stay with NPR for all the latest news.
We'll have results from the presidential race as well as abortion access ballot questions in 10 states.
And which party will control Congress? Next time, Here and Now.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
Republicans dominated the election with Donald Trump winning the presidency and Republicans taking back control of the Senate.
Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country and maybe beyond.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. We'll take a look at the path ahead for Trump and congressional Republicans. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
The country can now start to take stock after an election for the history books. How did the vote break down? Where did Trump overperform? And where did Harris miss the mark? I'm Jen White. We'd love you to paint us a picture of what changed where you live. That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. It's the 10th anniversary of Springfield's signature music festival. Here to tell us about Jacksonville Porchfest is Michael Haskins, Executive Director of SPAR. That's the Springfield Preservation and Revitalization Council. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Also joined by Ebonique, an R&B artist who hails from Jacksonville. She's also a trap soul singer. She'll be performing at Porchfest. Hey, Ebonique.
Hi.
So we have played your music on this program before, Ebonique, and we've talked about your music with Al Pete of WJCT's Saturday night program, The Neighborhood. But for somebody who may not have heard it, how do you describe your music?
Ooh, that's such a good question. First of all, I want to say thank you because I am very hip to how much JME and WJCT plays my music, so I'm so honored to be here. But I just feel like my mission as a musician is to translate the Black female experience through my eyes. So I try my best to do that whenever I'm writing music. So I take from old school R&B, jazz, and hip hop artists really and just kind of channel that into my music and hopefully it translates.
And that was a little music of yours that we heard coming in. What song was that?
Yes, that was Respectfully.
All right.
That was Respectfully, which is produced by Bob on keys, Bobby Wintons. He is absolutely incredible. He has like songs on the Billboard right now and he's right here in Jacksonville.
Yeah. So you were raised in Jacksonville.
Yes.
How has the musical landscape changed in the time
Ooh.
that you've been here?
You know, it's so interesting because I feel like when I was brought up, like I started by singing in the church. So I spent a whole lot of my time. My big sister was the first amateur night at the Ritz winner in 1999, I
Wow.
believe it was. So that was like my first time being exposed to like the actual local music scene. So just really like being a part of that and just seeing how much R&B artists and hip hop artists and rap artists and all of that have evolved. It's been really a beautiful transition to witness.
That was such a cool event at the Ritz. They don't do that anymore.
Yeah, they don't. They don't. Or they do, but putting on at the Ritz, I believe is what it's called. And they'll do it maybe like once or twice a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Michael, talk to us about Porchfest. This is a tradition in Springfield, and it really is like built around this architectural centerpiece of the homes in Springfield. So, for people who haven't been, just give us a sense of the vibe.
So we have the bands play on front porches in the neighborhood, and the homes are historic homes. They have these beautiful front porches. It creates a really interesting and unique backdrop for the bands to play in a really intimate stage. And the vibe, I guess I would say, so it's a community music festival. It's free, and it's volunteer run and volunteer led and volunteer driven. And I think that gives it a really special atmosphere. It feels almost like a holiday. People in Springfield are welcoming you into their neighborhood. They want you to be there. They are so excited to have you. And we really view this as a gift that we give to the city of Jacksonville.
I mean, it's a different level of intimacy because you really are being invited into someone's front porch, right? And in their yard, and you're kind of up close and personal with how people live. And it seems like a very generous thing for people to also offer their porches.
We call them our porch hosts, and they are very kind. And it's considered an honor. They get very excited. People want to be a porch host because Springfield is that kind of community that is very open and welcoming. But it is definitely something that it takes a little bit of work too. So we're really appreciative and grateful to them for doing that.
Yeah, that's a bunch of stages to be putting together. So how many homes or porches are participating? How many bands are going to be playing, and kind of over what span of time during the day?
The festival is noon to 8 p.m. We'll have 24 bands. We will have 21 different stages for those bands. I think 19 of them are going to be porches. We will also use the bandstand in Clutho Park, which we're really excited about because it's a 1920s bandstand that's historic, and we want to honor that history. And then we will have a main stage in the park with the city of Jacksonville skyline in the background. We think it'll be a really beautiful festival for everybody.
Ebony, have you played Porchfest before, or will this be?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. I've been on a Moving the Margins stage. I think that was back in 2022.
And what's the appeal? What is special about playing in that setting?
Oh, I think it's the most special. Anytime I can perform in the heart of the city, it doesn't get any better than that. Especially like being welcome into somebody else's home, kind of like you said. But it's really like whenever you're perusing through Springfield during Porchfest, you're just able to see a little bit of all that Jacksonville has to offer, which I love. I love performing in the midst of that.
And so what kind of set are you preparing?
So I have a genuine R&B and trap soul set. So I've got about 17, 18 songs. It's very interesting because my accompaniment is actually going to be a DJ, a female DJ. So I think that that's very important to have like female background vocalists and a female DJ and just really be able to illuminate that. Also bring a couple of friends with me so they'll have some of my time to really expose themselves and get their rocks off.
Excellent. That's great. I mean, so this is, you said goes to 8, but then there's a little bit of an after party component. Can you just briefly tell us about that?
Porchfest After Dark involves the neighborhood businesses. We have restaurants and bars that are going to be participating, and they'll be hosting bands themselves or other kind of promotions and discounts to draw people into the rest of the neighborhood and let people explore and see what Springfield has to offer.
All right. Well, Michael Haskins and Ebony, have a great Porchfest. It's Saturday, November 9th from 12 to 8. You can find more information at jacksporchfest.org. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That's our program, and thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or suggestions, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or at WJCT.org. Join us tomorrow when our Week in Review panel discusses the local election reaction.
Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. The Museum of Science and History presents Mission Astronaut, a new exhibition exploring life in space. Mission Astronaut is open September 21st through January 5th. More info at mosh.org.